Have you ever met someone who seemed almost too perfect, charming, attentive, seductive, only to later leave you feeling confused, drained, and unsure of your own worth? Seduction, at its core, is not inherently harmful. In healthy relationships, it's a natural process of attraction, vulnerability, and emotional connection. But when it becomes a tool in the hands of a narcissist, it transforms into something far more insidious. For them, seduction isn't about romance or connection. It's about power, control, domination. The narcissist doesn't pursue intimacy in the traditional sense. What they pursue is psychological leverage. From the very first interaction, their charm is calculated, their attentiveness is rehearsed, and the sweet words that feel like genuine affection. Those are carefully crafted lines in a script designed to lure you in and lower your defenses. Seduction, for them, is not a gesture of closeness, but the opening move in a long, strategic game. To understand this better, consider how predators in the wild behave. They don't just pounce, they stalk, they study their prey. They move slowly, silently, almost gracefully, until the right moment arrives. Narcissists are the same. They identify your vulnerabilities, whether it's low self-esteem, recent heartbreak, or a desire for deep emotional connection. They spot those cracks in your armor almost immediately and begin to fill them with exactly what you're missing. This is where seduction becomes a weapon. You might hear things like, "I've never met anyone like you," or "You're everything I've ever wanted," within days or weeks of knowing them. These phrases, while flattering on the surface, are not rooted in real knowledge of who you are. They're tools meant to create an illusion of deep intimacy where none actually exists yet. The goal is to make you feel seen, chosen, and exceptional, to disarm your natural skepticism and make you emotionally dependent on their validation. Let's look at an example. Imagine Sarah, a 32-year-old woman who had just come out of a 5-year relationship that ended due to infidelity. She felt unseen, betrayed, and unsure of her worth. Enter Daniel. He was charismatic, attentive, and seemed to understand her pain almost instantly. He told her, "You deserve someone who worships you," on their second date. Within 2 weeks, he was sending her flowers to her workplace, writing long romantic texts, and calling her his soulmate. To Sarah, it felt like a miracle. After all the pain and betrayal, here was someone who finally saw her value. But what Sarah didn't realize was that Daniel had done this many times before, with other women. His seduction wasn't a spontaneous expression of affection. It was a rehearsed method to create emotional dependency. He didn't care about Sarah's healing. He cared about gaining access to her emotional world so he could manipulate it. Once a narcissist senses that their seduction has taken root, that the other person is hooked, they begin to change. That's when the control truly sets in. They may start making subtle criticisms under the guise of just being honest. They might pull away emotionally to make you chase them, giving affection only when it benefits them. They become the center of your emotional universe, not because they earned that role through mutual love and respect, but because they strategically seduced their way into that position. This is the true purpose of their seduction, to position themselves as indispensable so that even when they begin to mistreat you, your longing for the initial affection keeps you bonded to them. What makes this even more dangerous is that the victim often doesn't recognize what's happening. Because the manipulation was disguised as affection, they question their own perceptions. "Maybe I'm overreacting," they tell themselves. "He was so sweet at the beginning. Maybe he's just going through something." That confusion is not an accident. It is engineered. Narcissistic seduction is designed to create a disorienting contrast between the idealized beginning and the manipulative present. Victims cling to the early days like a drug, desperately hoping that version of the narcissist will return. And sometimes they do, for a day or a week, just long enough to keep the illusion alive. This cycle strengthens the narcissist's control because it teaches the victim that the only way to feel loved again is to comply, to stay, to keep the narcissist happy. In this way, seduction becomes a leash wrapped in silk, soft to the touch, but binding nonetheless. The love bombing phase is one of the most dangerously intoxicating stages of narcissistic manipulation. On the surface, it looks like the beginning of a passionate love story, something straight out of a movie or fairy tale. It's that period when the narcissist showers their target with intense affection, overwhelming attention, lavish praise, and a constant stream of communication. But what many people don't realize is that this phase isn't rooted in genuine emotional connection. It's a calculated form of psychological seduction, engineered to disarm you, to make you attach quickly, to ensure you lower your guard. This is not a phase of falling in love. It's a phase of being conquered through flattery and stimulation. The narcissist isn't investing in you because they value who you are. They're investing in you to gain access to what you can offer: your loyalty, admiration, energy, and emotional labor. During the love bombing phase, the narcissist operates like a drug dealer handing out free samples. They give you exactly what you've always wanted: affection, attention, validation, and they give it to you in overwhelming doses. It's not uncommon for people to describe this period as euphoric. You're receiving good morning and good night texts like clockwork. They want to see you every day. They say things like, "I've never felt this way about anyone before," within the first few conversations. There's often talk of future plans, moving in together, marriage, kids, or traveling the world as a couple, long before that level of intimacy has been earned. It all feels spontaneous and fated. But this flood of affection is not rooted in emotional maturity or shared values. It is the narcissist mirroring what they believe you crave, giving it to you all at once to manufacture a bond that feels impossible to walk away from later. Take the story of Alex and Jenna. Jenna was 29, successful in her career and deeply independent, but also quietly yearning for a deep emotional connection after a few years of casual dating and emotional unavailability. When she met Alex, he seemed like everything she had been waiting for. Within days, he was calling her the love of his life. He told her that she was different from anyone he'd ever met. He brought her coffee at work, texted her nonstop, and said things like, "I just can't get enough of you." On the second week of dating, he introduced her to his family. By the third week, he was talking about them moving in together. To someone starved for emotional closeness, this level of enthusiasm and commitment felt like heaven. Jenna wasn't naive. She had her guard up initially, but Alex's consistency, his language, and his ability to anticipate her emotional needs made her feel like this wasn't just fast, it was real. But what Jenna didn't know was that Alex had done this before, with other women, over and over. The love bombing wasn't a reflection of deep affection or authentic interest. It was a strategy. Once Jenna was hooked, once she started building her routine around him, thinking about the future with him, feeling emotionally tied to his highs, Alex began to shift. The texts became less frequent. The compliments stopped. He started criticizing her choices subtly, her friends, her hobbies, even her tone of voice. But by then, Jenna was deeply invested. She believed in the version of Alex she met at the beginning. She blamed herself for the change. "Maybe I'm being too needy," she thought. "He was so sweet before. I must be the problem." And that's exactly what the narcissist wants, because love bombing isn't about creating real intimacy. It's about planting a seed of dependency, a craving for affection that only they can satisfy and just as easily withhold. This intense cycle of adoration creates a kind of emotional addiction. Your nervous system becomes conditioned to expect constant stimulation, validation, and connection. So when the narcissist inevitably withdraws their attention, it causes emotional panic. The sudden absence feels unbearable, not because you're losing a real relationship, but because you're being deprived of a psychological high. It's this very contrast, the extreme highs of love bombing followed by cold indifference or criticism, that keeps people hooked. Victims often find themselves chasing the rush of the early days, doing whatever it takes to get back to that place, even if it means tolerating emotional neglect or abuse. Love bombing, in this way, is like bait in a trap, irresistibly sweet, strategically placed, and almost impossible to walk away from once it's taken. Mirroring and idealization are two of the most deceptive and psychologically disorienting tactics used by narcissists in the early stages of manipulation. At first glance, mirroring can feel magical. It seems as if you've found someone who just gets you, someone who shares your values, dreams, quirks, and even your wounds. This uncanny alignment creates a powerful sense of emotional intimacy. But what many don't realize is that this connection is manufactured. Narcissists don't connect through genuine empathy or shared life experience. They connect by carefully studying you and then reflecting your personality back to you like a human mirror. It's not love, it's mimicry, and its purpose is to create a false sense of soulmate-level closeness, so you let your guard down and become emotionally tethered before any real foundation has been built. What makes mirroring so effective is that it's not always obvious. The narcissist doesn't copy you in a robotic or awkward way. Instead, they pay close attention to what makes you light up when you speak, your passions, your tastes in music or movies, your philosophy on relationships, and they gradually adopt those traits as their own. If you mention that you love hiking, suddenly they're outdoorsy. If you talk about how much family means to you, they'll echo that sentiment and share a made-up story about how close they are to their own. It feels organic. You start thinking, I've never had this much in common with anyone before. But what's really happening is psychological profiling. They are collecting data on what excites you, what hurts you, what motivates you, so they can become the perfect reflection of your ideal partner, friend, or confidant. The goal isn't connection. The goal is influence. Idealization goes hand in hand with mirroring. While they are reflecting your personality back at you, they are also placing you on a pedestal. You are the one, unlike anyone else, the person they've waited their whole life to find. This kind of praise is intoxicating, especially if you've been emotionally neglected or undervalued in the past. You start to see yourself through their admiring eyes. You feel chosen, special, and deeply seen. But the truth is, they are not admiring you. They're admiring an image they've created, an idealized version of you that serves their narrative. You're not being loved as a full, complex person. You're being cast in a role, and that role is central to the narcissist's game of control. Take, for instance, the story of Marcus and Naomi. Naomi was a passionate artist with a deep love for poetry and a history of relationships that had left her feeling emotionally starved. When she met Marcus, he seemed to be everything she'd dreamed of. He quoted obscure poets she adored, told her he'd always wished he could draw, and confessed that he'd never met someone so emotionally intelligent and spiritually in tune. He was fascinated by her, always asking deep, thoughtful questions, hanging on to her every word. He even picked up painting supplies and started sketching, just to be closer to her world. Naomi was mesmerized. She told her friends, "It's like we're the same person. It's scary how much we connect." But what Naomi didn't know was that Marcus had never once shown interest in art before her. He wasn't passionate about poetry. He Googled quotes to impress her. And his intense fascination with her wasn't about who she was. It was about drawing her in, making her feel like she'd finally found a rare kind of love. Over time, as Marcus grew bored or threatened by Naomi's growing independence, the idealization faded. Suddenly, her art was too emotional. Her passion was a bit much. The same traits that once made her divine in his eyes were now used as ammunition to devalue her. This shift wasn't accidental. It was a pattern. Narcissists idealize in order to trap, and once the target is emotionally invested, they begin to dismantle the very identity they once worshipped. This transition from mirroring and idealization to devaluation is especially jarring because it makes the victim question their own memory. They think, "But he loved this about me. What changed?" and that confusion becomes a powerful form of psychological bondage. Victims often blame themselves, thinking they did something wrong to lose that pedestal position. They try harder, give more, adjust who they are to get back to the person the narcissist pretended to be at the beginning. But that person was never real. He or she was a projection, a mask. And once the narcissist no longer needs that mask, it falls away, leaving the other person disoriented, hurt, and questioning their own sense of reality. Withholding and devaluation mark the beginning of the unraveling process in a narcissistic relationship, and they often arrive without warning, like a sudden shift in weather. After an intense phase of affection, adoration, and connection, built through love bombing, mirroring, and idealization, this next phase hits with a coldness that feels almost unrecognizable. The very person who once couldn't get enough of you begins to pull away. But they don't just disappear outright. That would give you clarity, maybe even closure. No, the narcissist's withdrawal is subtle at first. They start by withholding attention, affection, validation, or even basic responsiveness. You text them, and they reply hours later or not at all. The thoughtful gestures stop. Compliments vanish. Eye contact grows less frequent. You're no longer the center of their universe. And the worst part? You don't know why. The silence feels like punishment, but the crime is never clear. You begin to question yourself, retrace conversations, analyze your tone, second-guess your needs. This is not neglect by accident. It is withholding by design. The narcissist uses withholding as a control tactic to regain power in a relationship that may have begun to feel too balanced for their comfort. As soon as you start to feel secure or emotionally settled, they pull back to destabilize you. They need you off-center, reaching for their approval, wondering what went wrong. The silence isn't just silence. It becomes a statement, a way to say, I decide when you're worthy of my time, affection, or attention. It rewrites the emotional rules of the relationship and places the narcissist in the position of emotional gatekeeper. You find yourself walking on eggshells, trying to figure out how to get back to that beautiful beginning, not realizing that what you're trying to return to was never real in the first place. You become more accommodating, more patient, more forgiving, believing that if you just do everything right, they'll stop pulling away. But the game has already changed. Then comes devaluation. The compliments turn into criticisms. The admiration becomes mockery. The traits they once praised, your independence, your intelligence, your sensitivity, are now seen as flaws. You're too emotional, they might say, or you always overthink everything. It's as if they've suddenly grown tired of you, but instead of being honest or disengaging with maturity, they begin to chip away at your confidence. Devaluation is not always loud or explosive. Sometimes it comes in the form of sarcasm, dismissiveness, or backhanded compliments. It may sound like, wow, you really wore that? Or you actually think that's a good idea? Other times it's emotional invalidation, where your feelings are minimized or mocked. If you express hurt over the way they're acting, they'll say you're too sensitive or accuse you of starting drama. You begin to feel like you can't win. No matter what you do or say, it's never enough or it's always too much. Consider the story of Layla and Chris. When they met, Chris was intensely romantic. He wrote her poems, planned elaborate dates, and told her she was the most extraordinary woman he'd ever known. He told her she had changed his life. But months into the relationship, Chris began to act differently. He started going days without calling. When Layla expressed concern, he said she was needy. He stopped complimenting her appearance and instead made sarcastic remarks about her weight or how long she took to get ready. When she shared her creative projects with him, the same ones he once admired, he rolled his eyes or gave non-committal grunts. Layla tried harder, thinking maybe he was stressed or going through something. But nothing she did seemed to bring back the version of Chris she'd fallen for. What she didn't realize was that she was never dealing with two different people, just one person whose mask was slipping. Devaluation, when paired with withholding, creates a painful emotional contradiction. You're hurt, but you still crave their affection. You feel rejected, but you're desperate to prove your worth. This push-pull dynamic is precisely what keeps people stuck in narcissistic relationships for far too long. It activates something psychological, an almost addictive pattern where the brain chases after intermittent rewards. Like a gambler who can't walk away from the machine, you keep holding on for the next hit of warmth, the next kind word, the next glimpse of the person you thought you knew. But those moments become fewer, shorter, and increasingly conditional. And the more you're devalued, the more you begin to internalize their criticisms as truth. You start believing you are too emotional, too much, not enough. You shrink yourself in an attempt to fit into the mold they once adored, not knowing that that mold was never yours to begin with. It was just a reflection of what they wanted to see until they got bored, threatened, or disinterested. The push-pull cycle is one of the most confusing and psychologically draining dynamics in narcissistic manipulation. It is not just a pattern of inconsistent behavior. It is a methodical strategy to keep you emotionally unstable, addicted to intermittent affection, and always striving for the approval that once came so effortlessly. At the core of this cycle is the narcissist's deep need to control not just the relationship, but your perception of reality and self-worth. The cycle begins when they sense that you're either getting too close or gaining too much confidence. Either one threatens their fragile ego, so they pull away, but not completely. That would give you the chance to move on, to start healing. Instead, they distance themselves just enough to make you feel abandoned, confused, and desperate to win back their affection. Then, just as you begin to adjust to the coldness, just as you start to tell yourself that maybe it's over or time to move on, they pull you back in with kindness, affection, and those hauntingly familiar glimpses of the person they were at the beginning. This emotional whiplash creates a state of psychological chaos. The human brain is wired to seek consistency and resolution, and when neither is provided, it begins to overfunction. You become hypervigilant, always scanning for signs of rejection or reconnection. Your nervous system gets stuck in a loop of anticipation and anxiety. One moment you feel special and desired, the next moment discarded and invisible. This instability isn't incidental, it's the point. The narcissist wants you emotionally off balance because people who are confused are easier to control. People who crave stability will cling to even the illusion of it, and narcissists exploit this by giving you just enough attention to keep hope alive, never enough to feel secure. Imagine the case of David and Michelle. In the beginning, David pursued Michelle relentlessly. He made her feel adored, desired, and deeply understood. He'd say things like, "I can't believe I found someone like you," or "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Within weeks, they were spending almost every day together. But after a few months, David's behavior began to change. He would suddenly grow cold after an argument, stop responding to texts for a day or two, or cancel plans without notice. When Michelle confronted him, he would say things like, "You're overreacting," or "Why do you always assume the worst?" Each time she tried to pull away or express her confusion, David would flip the switch. He'd come back with a romantic gesture, a tearful apology, or a nostalgic message about how good things used to be. It was just enough to pull Michelle back in, but never enough to fix the deeper rupture that kept growing. Over time, Michelle stopped confronting David altogether. She became quieter, more agreeable, more focused on not upsetting him. She began to internalize the cycle as her fault, thinking that maybe if she were less emotional, less reactive, less needy, David wouldn't retreat so often. What she didn't realize was that the cycle wasn't about her behavior. It was about David's need to assert control. Every time he pushed her away, he was reaffirming his power. Every time he pulled her back, he was proving that he still owned a part of her heart, her mind, her self-worth. This is how the narcissist keeps the relationship alive, not through real love or connection, but through emotional captivity. The push-pull cycle also manipulates memory. Those rare moments of tenderness or affection, after days or weeks of emotional absence, feel magnified. Because they are so infrequent, They take on an almost mythical quality. You begin to see them as proof that the real person still exists underneath the cruelty. You tell yourself, that version of them is still in there. I just need to be patient. But the truth is, that version was always a mask, one they wear when they sense you slipping, when they fear losing control. The intermittent nature of the push-pull pattern keeps you from seeing the relationship clearly. Instead of recognizing a pattern of emotional abuse, you cling to the memory of emotional highs. And the narcissist ensures those highs are just powerful enough to keep you invested, while the lows slowly strip away your sense of self. In many cases, this cycle becomes the very reason people stay in narcissistic relationships far longer than they should. It creates what psychologists call a trauma bond, a deep emotional tie rooted not in love, but in the psychological addiction to unpredictable rewards. Just like in gambling, where the uncertainty of a payout keeps players glued to the slot machine, the unpredictability of affection keeps victims locked in place, always hoping the next pull will bring back the magic of the beginning. What's terrifying is that over time you begin to normalize the chaos. You convince yourself that all relationships are this hard, that all people are this complicated, that maybe you just need to tough it out. And that normalization is exactly what allows the narcissist to continue cycling through their manipulation unchecked, using the same emotional levers over and over, knowing exactly when to push and exactly when to pull. Breaking the illusion of a narcissistic relationship is one of the most difficult and disorienting experiences a person can endure. That's because what you're leaving behind isn't just a relationship, it's a fantasy. Narcissists are skilled illusionists, crafting not only a false persona for themselves, but also a distorted version of you, your value, and the world you shared together. The illusion isn't just based on lies. It's built on carefully engineered emotional experiences, crafted moments of euphoria, intermittent validation, and psychological manipulation that gradually rewire how you think, feel, and respond. What you fall in love with isn't really them, it's the version of them they projected to hook you, and the version of yourself they convinced you to become to stay worthy of their approval. And when the cracks start to form, when the mask begins to slip and reality starts seeping through, your first instinct isn't always to run. Often it's to fight for the illusion, to try to repair the false image because facing the truth feels like emotional death. The process of breaking the illusion is layered and deeply psychological. For many people caught in a narcissistic dynamic, there is a prolonged phase of cognitive dissonance, when your mind holds two conflicting truths at once. On one hand, you remember the charm, the connection, the passion, and all the ways the narcissist made you feel seen. On the other hand, there are the gaslighting, the lies, the cruelty, and the manipulation that you know deep down are destroying you. Your heart longs for the good times, while your intuition whispers that something is deeply wrong. This internal war can last for months or even years. Narcissists feed on that tension. They will continue to drip feed affection, reappear just when you've found the strength to pull away, and remind you of the beautiful moments you shared, knowing full well that your mind is still attached to the illusion they created. Take the example of Sarah and Elijah. In the beginning, Elijah was everything Sarah had ever dreamed of. He was attentive, romantic, and seemed to understand her in ways no one else ever had. He talked about building a future, used the language of soulmates, and always knew the right words to say. But slowly, things began to change. He became distant, critical, and often turned the blame on Sarah whenever issues arose. He would withhold affection for days, then return with grand apologies and say things like, "You know I'm not perfect, but I've never felt this way about anyone before." The cycle became a loop of emotional starvation, followed by a flood of affection, just enough to keep Sarah questioning her judgment. Even when she cried herself to sleep at night, she told herself, "But he loves me. He just has a hard time showing it." That's the power of the illusion. It's not just about who they are. It's about what they've conditioned you to believe. For many, the illusion only starts to shatter when the pain finally outweighs the hope. It's often a subtle internal shift rather than a dramatic revelation. You begin to realize that the moments of love you're clinging to aren't happening anymore, and maybe never happened in the way you believed. You notice how you've changed, how you second-guess your instincts, walk on eggshells, or feel small around someone who once made you feel like the center of the universe. The realization creeps in slowly, that you've been playing a role in someone else's story, a story where love was always conditional, approval always earned, and your worth constantly negotiated. And when you finally begin to see the narcissist not as the misunderstood, complex person you once defended, but as someone emotionally parasitic who used your vulnerability against you, the illusion begins to collapse. But this collapse doesn't bring immediate peace. It brings grief, identity crisis, and sometimes even guilt. You don't just mourn the person, you mourn the fantasy. You mourn the version of yourself you became to be loved by them. You mourn the time invested, the dreams built on false promises, and the emotional energy spent defending a reality that was never fully real. Friends might say, just leave, but they don't understand that what you're really doing is breaking up with a lie you once deeply needed to believe. The narcissist, of course, senses this awakening. If they notice you pulling away or beginning to question the narrative, they'll often try to reinsert themselves with renewed charm or sudden vulnerability. They might confess they've been struggling with demons, tell you you're the only one who understands them, or even promise to change. These aren't signs of growth. They are last-ditch efforts to keep you hooked, because your awakening threatens the very control they've worked so hard to establish. Breaking the illusion means reclaiming reality, and reality often hurts before it heals. It requires brutal honesty with yourself, the courage to accept that what you thought was love was actually manipulation, and the willingness to feel every uncomfortable truth that comes with that. It's not a clean break. It's a process filled with doubt, regret, sadness, and a gradual reassembly of your identity from the wreckage of who you were conditioned to be. So, if you've ever found yourself trapped in a cycle where love felt like a drug, intoxicating one minute and poisonous the next, know that it wasn't your weakness that kept you there. It was a system designed to hook you, to confuse you, to make you believe that the pain was somehow your fault, and the brief moments of pleasure were proof of something real. Narcissistic seduction isn't about love. It's about power. It's about control disguised as passion and cruelty wrapped in charm. And the longer you stay, the more you forget what healthy love actually feels like. Quiet, stable, consistent. But here's the truth. Once you begin to see the pattern, you're no longer under its spell. Awareness is the first crack in the illusion, and through that crack, light can pour in. You begin to ask different questions, set different standards, and most importantly, you start to choose yourself. Healing from this kind of manipulation takes time. It takes strength. But piece by piece, you reclaim your clarity, your voice, and your sense of self. You remember that real love doesn't need to seduce, confuse, or punish you to prove its worth. It simply shows up again and again in peace. And if this speech made you pause, reflect, or even feel seen for the very first time, stay with that, because that feeling is the beginning of your freedom.